Something soon made clear about Disney's acquisition of the Star Wars brand was a higher, faster distribution of content. After Star Wars The Force Awakens, a year later comes the release of Rogue One, and then The Last Jedi. And there's also a new Han Solo film soon to come. Some might look at this as a particularly great time for Star Wars fans, as they are technically called. Rogue One received high marks from critics and did very well at the worldwide box office.
I want to start by asking you what in the world you just called Star Wars fans.
That's what they're called. That is the technical term for Star Wars fans. Staries.
That's not a real thing.
Yeah, it is.
I will never, ever, ever sit down and tell anybody I'm a starry.
Yeah. You know how, like, Star Trek fans are like, I'm a Trekkie. Well,
nobody says that, though. Like, nobody comes up and says, I'm a star. Oh, you're making it, like, this. So this isn't an official thing. This is a thing that you're making a thing.
It is
so everybody now sit down, and when everybody asks you if you're a Star Wars fan, you say, I'm not a Star Wars fan, I'm a starry.
Yeah, exactly.
It's going to make you feel awkward at first, but it's going to catch on, and people are going to all be starries.
And they're going to admire you for bringing that to them. Like,
right, they're going to feel like they're a connection and they're part of, like, the overall community. It's going to feel really like a brothership or a sistership.
Well, Rapists and Germs, welcome to the Mishmash Podcast. I'm Nicholas McConaughey here alongside Scott Moore, and for today's episode we'll be talking about Rogue One. This is the first of the Star Wars anthology series, which is soon to have the Han Solo film, and as also, I haven't heard about other ones. Maybe a Boba Fett film. Maybe we'll finally get a Jar Jar Binks film. I know that we've been clamoring about that ever since we first saw him in The Phantom Menace.
Oh boy! That was Mickey.
Well, it's possible. Like, Disney can make a crossover with them. They pretty much own everything now. So
they could do like a Jedi Mickey Christmas special.
I'm so happy with the acquisition of Disney buying Fox, because this means that we can finally consider Alien as a Disney princess.
I'm still trying to figure out the Mickey and Jedi thing in the Christmas special, because I think I'm making it in my head. Like, oh no, how do we cut down all these trees? Womp! And then they have lightsabers, and then bam, Jedi saves Christmas. I think that we could do it to where, like, the Siths come too, and they're cutting down trees, and everybody's just happy. And we're having all this, and Kylo Ren is a Disney princess, and let's go to Rogue One.
The film is set immediately before the events of Episode 4, A New Hope, and follows a rebel alliance that sets themselves on a mission to steal plans from the Death Star. It centers around a woman named Jyn Erso, played by Felicity Jones. Rogue One is directed by Gareth Edwards, otherwise known for the enjoyable low-budget film Monsters, and the dull high-budget film Godzilla. First and foremost, what were your thoughts about the concept? Not necessarily the film itself, but the idea of them doing an anthology series. What were your thoughts about them doing, before even you've seen Rogue One, the idea of Rogue One, about a Han Solo film, about these films in general? Did you think that it was too much, or were you completely on board with it?
I want to see Star Wars all the time, every year, for the rest of forever. But I don't want to see a whole Han Solo movie. I don't care. Han Solo doesn't interest me in his own solo movie. He interests me a lot in the initial 3 Star Wars. He also interests me a lot in Episode 7, but I don't need to go into depth on that.
So what you're saying is you would have preferred, instead of a Han Solo film,
smuggler film.
Like a smuggler, or it doesn't need to be Han Solo, but you would not be against having a film of the same kind, we don't need to see these characters in this way. You feel that their stories have been told?
I feel like we're stretching them out in the sense that Han Solo has been in, 4 movies now of the Star Wars, and he doesn't really need to have his own set-off movie. It's one of those things where he's a very mysterious character, and you don't need to know his background, and it's okay to not know his background. He's not an Anakin Skywalker. You don't need to know his background there. He's not any of that. I don't need to know where Chewie came from. I don't need to know that. Like, to make me like Chewie, I don't need to know what he looked like as a teenage Chewie, you know? Maybe he was clean shaven or whatever. It doesn't matter to me. It doesn't really hold that interest. And I'm not saying it won't be a good movie. I don't know. But I'm just saying I don't need it.
Like, I was excited for the concept of a Han Solo film. As you said, and I kind of want to echo that sentiment, is that we probably didn't need a Han Solo film per se. But I was very, very interested in the idea of spin-off films, as whenever I watched Episode 7, which we'll get into later on, like, I don't have that affection for the series that a lot of people have. I enjoy it for what it is, but I don't have a closeness, and I don't really care about them messing anything up. I don't have that, like, guard over it. I liked the idea of being able to perhaps take a step back and do smaller stories amidst this universe, because it's such a large, robust universe that you can do a lot of different things. I liked the idea that, for instance, that Han Solo would be directed by, I think it's Christopher Miller and Phil Lord. They are the guys that were previously known for the Lego Movie and 21 and 22 Jump Street, which I don't know what you thought about them, but I think...
Did they not get a new director for that movie,
Yeah, they did. They ended up firing them because I heard a lot of different things. I heard that they did a lot of improv, that they have
What is the guy's name? The guy from Happy Days. What's his name?
It's Ron Howard.
Ron Howard, that's his name.
He's not a bad director by any means. He's got a lot of movies that I don't particularly enjoy. He's very serious, is what I've gathered, and he's got a lot of movies that like are very, very dull. Like he did the Da Vinci Code, which is a very, very dumb film series, I would say. They're I guess they're entertaining popcorn film kind of thing, where you don't have to think about it very much, but it's not like that doesn't get me excited. And he's done a lot of good films as well. He did a movie called The Heart of the Sea, which was a pretty good film, like a reiteration or retelling of Moby Dick. And I thought that was a pretty enjoyable film. It's a film that I didn't like. It's not a very exciting film though, and it's not something that makes me really excited because it's not something I think would bring a lot of new elements to the Star Wars franchise as a whole. It's not going to bring a lot of enthusiasm. It's very, very serious, very, very ho-hum.
It would be odd if Han Solo was ever serious. Han Solo is the most practical, joking character. He's the funny guy out of Star Wars. I mean, C-3PO is probably the funniest character, but he doesn't mean to be funny. He just is. Han Solo is that guy who is kind of sarcastic, and his diatribe is a little, off kilter, and you're meant to laugh with him because he is just who he is. He's an egocentric narcissist. But again, like you said, when you opened up that dialogue, you said something and that hits. It's that Star Wars is such a big place. It's an expansive universe. It is hundreds upon hundreds of planets inside the universe, and we don't need to tell the same story that we've already told. There's plenty of other stories. We could have went into the smugglers, and we could have told a story about them, but why do we need to tell it through Han Solo? We know where he ends up. We know where he started. We know where he goes, and we know how he ends. We don't need that beginning. It doesn't do anything for the Han Solo character, whereas maybe making a smuggler series or a smuggler movie could have showed us a different side, the underbelly.
It kind of, in a way, it's similar to... And whenever we talked about, during our Marvel cinematic discussion, you referred to Guardians of the Galaxy as a, quote-unquote, better Star Wars. In a lot of ways, if you look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe, whenever Guardians of the Galaxy was released, it was very, very off and away from the Marvel Universe. It was very much its own thing. Whereas, and I think that's what I wanted to see, is more stuff in that universe, but isn't directly related to the universe as a whole. It's very, very small, and it doesn't have to necessarily mean anything. I don't necessarily need to see the characters cross over into the major Star Wars films. Just do something in their world, and do a completely unique film. And that's what I think that... And that's why I was excited for Rogue One, for instance, because I thought to myself, I would like to see a different type of story with different types of characters, and not have to think to myself, like, in particular, I wanted them to be self-contained, like, because especially in the movie industry today, as I watch a film, I constantly think to myself, like, how is this going to progress in the sequel? How is it going to build onto this? And it was refreshing, the idea of watching a film that doesn't have any connotations or... Well, it does have connotations, but it's not building toward a sequel. It's its own thing, but at the same time, it's building and complementing and supplementing the original series while being able to do its own thing.
So, did you mean contained as if maybe they were trapped in a force field on a planet?
No.
Because that's what ends up happening to them, so they are very contained. But Rogue One was one of those films where I said, what can they do with this? And that was fine. I didn't hate the idea of Rogue One. Did I think that there needed to be a bridge between, Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, and the last episode of the originals, the first episode of the originals, sorry, did I think that there needed to be a little bridge there? And not really. I didn't need that, but whenever they announced it, I was like, okay, well, I'll watch it. It's Star Wars. I'm gonna watch it. It's gonna hold me over until Episode 8 comes out. Let's see it. So I watched it, and while a lot of the ideas are compelling, a lot of it really just makes me think that a lot of the characters in Star Wars, the originals, were inflated in their necessity or how they garnered their popularity. Like Leia, she was praised for finding these Death Star weaknesses, and it wasn't even her who did it. It was the main character of Rogue One, her father, who built in the sequence, and then it was her who found it. And it had nothing to do. Leia literally walked 5 feet to grab a chip from somebody and stuck it in R2-D2, and all of a sudden she's the most famous person. And that's fine, because I really like Leia.
That's really impressive, though. You gotta think, though, like, whenever you try to plug in a USB cable, sometimes it's tricky. Sometimes you're like, you have to turn it.
Right, and she did it the first time.
Yeah, and she did it her first try. She didn't have to do anything.
It would have sucked, because then she would have panicked and maybe dropped it, and then the whole Star Wars would have just been over.
She was like a hacker.
But honestly, though, you watched it, and I'm sitting there thinking, and why? Why would they put that in there? I didn't need that. No, as soon as I started watching Rogue One, now, overall, I liked Rogue One. I thought it was a pretty decent movie. But if you start comparing it to the other Star Wars and actually thinking of it as in the cinematic universe of Star Wars, then you could start poking holes in it. Like a lot of these things where you thought these characters were big and expansive and huge, you kind of find out that they were dull and they didn't really have much to do with anything, and you find out that the evil empire with the guy, I'm blanking on his name now, and I shouldn't be, but the man that they CGI'd into it, the older gentleman that was a general.
I know you're talking about, but
I'm blanking on it. But anyways, I thought that in the original movies that he was the mastermind behind the Death Star. I thought he was, and it turns out that he had nothing to do with it. He just was like, hey, I'm going to take over the Death Star now. And the guy who created it's like, what? Like, how? And then the guy's like, deal with it. And he just takes over, and he takes credit. And you are just made to believe that he did it. Just the same thing with Leia. She just takes credit for getting these plans. She had nothing to do with it. You don't even hear about these people who risked their lives, ended up having to die on this planet, because the fact of the matter is that whenever she started giving them the plans, they were like, meh, maybe not. Maybe we should just, turn ourselves in. And then they decided not to turn themselves in, and then they blew up the team that went in there to make sure that everything was going to be okay for the rebels. And that's where I don't think that it was needed. Overall, like I said, good movie. Don't think it was needed for the canon of the actual series.
Yeah. Something that bothered me ahead of time, and what I said earlier, to go back on that, is I wanted something unique. And, whenever I first heard about Rogue One, I was excited because I thought it was going to be its unique own thing, and then I later discovered that it was actually going to be a complement to Episode 4 and thereon. I would much prefer just something that is completely separate, that isn't meant to add or build onto anything or make the script more coherent or tighter. I wanted something that was completely its own thing and its own entertaining movie. I do think that whenever I heard about it, one of the first things I heard is that it took place on it's Princess Leia's planet, like her home planet, right? It's the planet that it takes place on. Yeah. Because it's the one that gets destroyed. And like that's the only thing I really knew about it. It was like, oh, it's the planet that gets destroyed, so these characters are going to die. All of them are going to die, and I felt completely comfortable in that. So I go into it with all the excitement for where it's going to lead, as if I was watching Titanic, because I already know the ship is sinking, and that bothered me. Like, because I knew that I knew where it was going to lead, and that bothered me. And it feels like, and I already knew that they were trying to get the plans, and since I already knew what happened in A New Hope, I know for a fact that they get the plans. So those aspects, like, there's no real detriment to conflict, because I already know where it's going to lead. So what the film is left with, and with a lot of action movies, you find yourself thinking, like, you already know what's going to happen, the good guy is generally going to win. What it's left up to is it has to be an entertaining ride. You have to enjoy the ride to get there. And I felt, for the most part, that it was a pretty ho-hum film. Like, it was very, very... I didn't feel very much interested in the characters, and I didn't find much interest in the film as a whole. I am a big fan of Mads Mikkelsen, who is the guy that plays the father of Felicity Jones' character, or of Jin's character. I'm a big fan of him because I'm a big fan of the show Hannibal. And I was excited to see him, and he's good in it. He doesn't get to do a whole lot. And ultimately, that's what I think about most of these characters, is they don't get to do a whole lot.
He puts the weak point in the Death Star, and then never gets talked about again. Because who cares about the guy who actually made the weakness?
So just so I'm clear, because it's been a long time since I've watched the original films, the weakness is that little hole, right?
Yeah.
So, but which is what I figured and what I pretty much knew. But I'm like, did nobody go like, what's that little hole there? What is the significance of this little hole?
So he just builds it in without telling anybody, and I mean, he's the builder of it. No one really else. They bring in all these top builders, and then he is one of the main masterminds. No one else really knows what's going on. If you understand anything watching those Vader scenes in Rogue One, you understand that Vader has no idea what's going on. The Emperor really doesn't know. They're really good in the Force, not so much with, engineering. That's not really their thing. What their thing is force choking the engineers into doing what they want. Not so much building, but making sure the building gets done. So they're the government while they're pushing the little man down. But one of the things that you really notice about Rogue One, and I liked the movie for being a movie. I don't know that I necessarily liked it for being a Star Wars movie. And again, it was because it showed the incompetence of everyone. Except for, it did make me think that, I always thought Vader was this amazing villain. And
which, by the way, the scene with Vader in that movie, first off, it was really cool, and like I said, I don't plug myself in very much or get too invested in, Star Wars movies as some do. But seeing him, the action sequence involving him, where he's like, and, you can't see my hand motions, but I'm going, but those movements, I'm pretty sure that he wasn't so fast and so like that in the original movies. He got way.
Well, the original movies also, you got to think that they were kind of bogged down by the technological
But it's not. But his movements, he wasn't as good, is what I'm saying.
He was great he was one of the strongest people with the Force.
But was he that good at using his movements were different?
The lightsaber?
Yeah.
Yeah, the movements were different mostly because of the technological advances with the fake sword.
I'm not criticizing that much. I just
observed. Yeah, but he was supposed to be the strongest Force user. he was the chosen one, if that is the direction we're going. I don't know that he was the best overall lightsaber user. Because Obi-Wan Kenobi definitely bested him, and I think that some say that Luke Skywalker was supposed to be the best with the lightsaber, but he was good. He wasn't bad at all, and so that didn't really bother me, that part. I really liked the two scenes that we had with Vader in it. The one where he's walking down the hallway and just in 28 seconds mutilates 20 guards, and that's
it's that. Cool. I don't I criticize it, and I really only bring it to the table because a lot of people were pointing it out to me that he was very, very different in his movements. I don't care. My thought process is hey, it's Vader, I know him, and I'm oh, he's really, really fast and cool, and it's I don't give it as much thought as some people do.
So yeah, that's what I'm saying. If I sit back and I don't give it thought, I like Rogue One.
Yeah,
if I sit back and I start thinking about poking holes in it, and I start to like Rogue One a little less. And I don't necessarily sit back and do that very often for the purpose of this discussion. I'm sitting here thinking about some of the things that did not work for it, and that's why I'm saying it really doesn't fit in if you think of it as, the episode 3.5. If you think of it as episode 3.5, then it deteriorates and breaks down because they were never talked about again, and that just really bothers me. Like, you can't send somebody on a death mission and they win and they become these martyrs and they become like these great people who have
and they never bring them up again,
and then you never talk about them again. That'd be like Jesus coming down and getting on the cross, and then no one talks about Jesus again. Like, that would be what it was like. It was
just walking by like, hey, there's a scarecrow over there.
Right. It's like, did you know that the cross is what saved us? Like, that would be like saying that, and it's like they just forget about these people. And although they're dead, they sacrifice their lives to make sure that this, group of rebels could be successful, which they never are, but they could be successful, which goes to show the incompetence, again, of the rebel force. Because, really, if you think about a lot of this stuff, like, the Empire is kind of dumb. And if you think that the Empire is kind of dumb, then you really have to think that the rebels were just really bad. Like, why couldn't they just go in there and steamroll them? Like, they're just bad. Like, the Emperor's always talking about how Vader fails him. Vader, you have failed me. Vader, you have failed me. Well, if Vader's the strongest you got, and he's always failing you, and then, like, these other ones they're just incompetent, they don't really know what's going on, and it's just like, wow. So what is the problem with the rebels, and why can't they just, step up and do this?
What do you think about the CGI? There was that one character that was CGI'd back into it, and there was obviously, at the end of the film, it featured Princess Leia at the end CGI'd in there as well. A lot of people criticized it. They said that the CGI looked really bad. I don't care, but
I don't think that it didn't change my opinion of the movie at all.
I think people get mad just to get mad about a lot of things. I think it's
one of those things where you think about how pretentious people can get. It's one of those things, as soon as something's a little bit different, they hate it.
Which is funny, because that's one of the criticisms a lot of people, like, the going criticism was with, and we'll get into it later, is that Episode 7 was too much like Episode 4. And the criticism a lot of people have said about Episode 8 is it's too different. And I'm like, you guys...
I think that people just get to the point to where they just want to figure something out bad about everything. And that's what scares me about watching anything now. Like, whenever it comes out, I'm like, man, I don't even know that I'm going to hate it. It's just that everybody else is going to hate it, and then it's going to ruin the experience for me.
And that's part of the reason why I try to take myself out of a lot of things, where I don't consider myself particularly a fan of one thing in general. Because one thing I always try to do is I try to approach things with an open mind whenever possible. Because while I don't consider myself the biggest Star Wars fan, it still remains, I have gone to the theater to see Episode 7, I have went to the theater to see Rogue One and Episode 8, and regardless of my thoughts on them, I continue to give them a chance, and, like, usually it depends, but, I don't consider myself someone who's looking for a very, very lore-heavy thing, or I'm not looking to poke holes in it, I'm really just looking for a movie that entertains me. Like, I don't consider myself a movie critic, or just someone who is trying to criticize films. I'm trying to just find a movie that I enjoy, and what I'd like to do is go, like, I like that, didn't like that, but I did like that, and then, like, I'm not really digging into it. I didn't mind the CGI. The biggest criticisms I just have with Rogue One is a page-turner. It is not. It just was very, very dull to me. Like, in some of the comedy in it, which... comedy in general with Star Wars has never Star Wars comedy has never been much of a hit when it comes to my thoughts on it. A lot of people thought Episode 7 was funny. I didn't really think it was all that funny. And Rogue One has that one robot in it who does those...
Black C-3PO.
Yeah, and I'm like, it's kind of... like I've seen this 100 times before. His comedy, it's nothing.
Well, his comedy was exactly the same as C-3PO.
Not only that,
it wasn't really any different.
This is kind of the same comedy we get from, like, in the Avengers movies, too. Like, when Vision, the way he acts, the way... it's like a comedy that's very popular right now, where everything is just alien to them, and that's the joke, is that they're so awkward or so different from our mindset. And it's funny sometimes, but it's kind of like... In this one, it just didn't seem like it did anything new. The film itself, I just had trouble getting into in any regard. It was very much, like... Because I couldn't become invested in the conflict... Didn't really care about the story. I kind of walked away from it with really just like, it's not a bad film, it's not a really good film, it's just a decent film. I don't have any strong problems with it. My biggest problem was apathy, and that's all I really have. Like, whenever I went to see it with my girlfriend, and her thought process was like, she left it and was like, that's freaking great, that was great, awesome. And I'm like, and that's pretty much my thoughts, is
So I guess that leaves us with the end of this discussion, and it leaves us with time to rate the movie. So, out of 10, what is your rating?
I don't usually like giving them out of 10. That's why I said decent. Decent, if... I would say probably, if I had to, a 6. 6 out of 10 is mine.
And I'm going to go ahead and say that it's probably... a 7 for me. A 7. So a 6 and a 7. That's Rogue One. Now we're going to continue the discussion. If you guys want to click to the next video, we're going to be talking about The Force Awakens. You guys can like, comment, and subscribe to this video. And click on over and follow us to the next.
Thanks for watching.